Welcome back to the Velo podcast. I'm your host, Adam Cohen, alongside Henry Winkelhake. And Henry, we don't have too much news in terms of big free agents off the board or great trades that are happening, but we have some good baseball news this week about the Negro Leagues being finally accepted, long wait, and finally accepted into a Major League Baseball league, and also the Cleveland Indians deciding to change their team name.
Yeah, not only great baseball news, but kind of just great news for humanity as far as I'm concerned. Definitely, I'm very much in support of both of those things. I think most people probably are. We'll get into it a little bit deeper, but definitely some positive news, and I'm happy that we've got these headlines to discuss tonight.
I am too, and I don't know about you, but this idea about the Negro Leagues becoming a major league affiliate, that was kind of shocking to me that it wasn't already, and that also it took so long until 2020 to make that happen. And it also kind of just came out of nowhere. There was no momentum or nothing that we heard about it leading up until that point, and it just kind of was brought upon us, which is great. And in fact, it is the most prolific non-major league organization before it was implemented a few days ago, because there's such as the Federal League or the American Association or the Union Association, but all those leagues only lasted a year or two, and the Negro Leagues lasted over 25 plus years. So 3,400 players will be added to MLB's history, and there's already 30 Negro League players, and Zach is already in the Hall of Fame. So this will add on to the great legacy, and it's just a really great day for baseball when that was announced a few days ago.
You are echoing my thoughts completely, my friend. I agree. It was long overdue, kind of surprising that it took this long for it to happen. And I agree with your sentiment too, that it did kind of feel like out of nowhere, which not in a bad way at all. And maybe kind of nice too. You know, maybe I'm thinking, and I don't want to like be too hypothetical here, but if maybe kind of earlier in the year when racial tension was at its highest, maybe that would have been a cool time to do it. But then you also don't want to, make it look like you're just pandering and trying to do something for that reason. So it was the right thing to do. And I mean, I think the timing seems great and certainly awesome for the game that so many legacies of these great players that did play in the Negro Leagues, that they've kind of more cemented now their place in the game's history.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I wonder, because of the rise in racial tensions in the middle of the year, and of course that is still ongoing, of course, but I wonder if that's what drove this to happen, or at least when Black Lives Matter came into creation of several years back, I wonder if that's what started to lead to this, because it seemed like there was a lot of research and widespread agreement, and it seems like now was a really good time to, of course, do this year.
And I really haven't heard like any pushback, or thankfully, I think that would be a dumb opinion. But so if there's like no opposition to this, then that kind of feeds back into the question is why is it just now happening? It seems like a no-brainer. And I think that is pretty much the consensus among baseball fans. But I certainly don't want to, spoil this great day by complaining about it not happening earlier. I think definitely cause for celebration, and better late than never, certainly when it comes to time to righting historic wrongs.
Yeah, if there was any small opposition to it, I think it's just these stats that are going to be changed a little bit. For example, Willie Mace's 660 homers are iconic to the baseball world, but because now they're adding in the Negro League stats, they might have an extra homer for him. So it might not be 660 anymore. Or Satchel Paige, for example, if you look on Fangraphs or Baseball Reference, his stats aren't too pronounced because he didn't spend too many times in the major leagues. But now we'll say that he had 112 completed games and 25 shutouts and 115 wins and 1,500 plus innings pitched. So it adds on to his legacy too. Or Willie Mace might have some extra hits, but there's not going to be some crazy margin. For example, Josh Gibson was said to have hit 800 plus homers in the Negro Leagues, but statistics weren't kept too well during that era, and especially in a league not as, I guess, aforementioned as Major League Baseball, or maybe not as covered. So, in fact, he'll just maybe have 200 plus homers, which will still put him up on the list, but not as high as maybe people may have thought.
Right. And there are definitely a whole lot of statistical takeaways from this. And it doesn't look like any of the huge records are necessarily going to be changing hands, but certainly great to see these numbers recognized in the record book. And to see kind of how some of those legacies change. Like I thought another interesting part of it is Hank Aaron is picking up a few home runs from this, but not quite enough to surpass Barry Bonds. And that would have been awesome for me. I'm a pretty anti Barry Bonds guy. I know a lot of people are, but a lot of people love him too. But just kind of interesting to see how some of the statistics change, even if the records aren't changing. Definitely feel great for Satchel Paige's legacy getting cemented like this. And he would have had even more wins. It's important to note that the Negro League seasons weren't as long. So that did kind of limit his statistical numbers a little bit. But, man, overall very happy to see it. Very awesome for the game, I think. And, yeah, I was a little surprised by Josh Gibson home run total. Not that I grew up watching Negro League baseball. I was before my time. But you just kind of the legend of Josh Gibson. I would have thought more than 200.
And as mentioned, of course, it wasn't kept as tracked as heavily. There was less researchers, less reporters covering it. But yeah, I was pretty surprised by that too. I thought it might be like the 400s or 500s. I mean, this was a player that was literally considered the Black Babe Ruth. So it was very interesting to see that. And honestly, we're both stat heads here, and a lot of our viewers are too. I can't wait to mess around with this on Baseball Reference or Fangraphs and just go through the list of all these players added and see where they rank and see how their seasons were, and maybe even see how much WAR they accumulated. That's going to be so much fun. I was already trying to see if that was updated on Fangraphs, but it'll probably take a little bit of time.
And a couple more cool statistical takeaways that I found in this. You think about the list of no-hitters that's growing for this. Guys who were able to throw one in the Negro Leagues had perfect games as well. Bob Feller, no longer the only guy to have a no-hitter on opening day. Leon Day joining that list. So, really some cool, quirky statistical things in this. Josh Gibson, well, I was talking about how he didn't hit 800 home runs, but he still has one of the best batting average seasons in modern history now. He hit 441 in 1943. So that added to the record book as well. But I think just overall good for the game, and we're happy about it.
Actually, I think I know that 441 statistic you're mentioning. I think it was over a smaller sample size, as you mentioned, because the Negro League season was shorter, but it should count still as an official season. But yeah, that would break, I believe it's Hugh Duffy's record. So that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, absolutely, man. But kind of moving forward, actually, before I switch topics, I do want to take just a second to say hi to Jules, because Jules is always commenting on our videos, one of our greatest supporters. So Jules, if you are still listening, still tuned in, thank you so much for tuning in to every episode and for cheering us on. I really appreciate it. And it's awesome to get your support in the comments.
Yes, thank you, Mom, for always tuning in. I didn't know if you realized that, but yeah, that's my.
I didn't know that was your mom.
Yeah,
I mean,
my mom always.
I saw the last name was you, but
Yeah.
Thank you, Adam's mom.
Yeah, so she's been watching us for a while. Definitely supporter. I appreciate it. So yeah, she's always tuning in. It pops up on her feed, and yeah, it's really nice.
She's our number one fan. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, I should respond back more on the show too. Just give that little shout out each time.
Yeah, but then moving forward, the next piece of baseball news that we have to cover, I kind of feel like dancing around what to call them now. The team formerly known as the Cleveland Indians has dropped their nickname. They will no longer be called the Indians. They haven't named a replacement yet. I was on board with this one too, Adam. I was pleased to see it. I think it's kind of another thing that maybe overdue. While I don't think this was necessarily, and I don't want to compare. It's a hard comparison. I don't want to say this was as bad as not recognizing the Negro Leagues, but it's certainly a welcome change, and I think it's progress for the game. And I'm excited to see what the new team name ends up being.
Yeah, it's definitely keeping up with the times. Obviously, the Washington Redskins had a similar type of situation. Now they're the Washington football team. The Cleveland team, formerly known as Cleveland Indians, will not be known as the Cleveland baseball team. They already said that much, so it's not like a sixth grader just trying to send in a project last minute, not having a name to think of, which is good to hear. And I don't know about you, Henry, but I was bouncing around some names that I thought were cool. For example, the Cleveland Indians, they were once called the Cleveland Naps after Napoleon LaJolie, who's one of their best players ever. So instead of the Cleveland Naps, which would be a little bit silly, maybe the Cleveland Napoleons, that'd be pretty cool. Or I know a lot of Cleveland fans or Cleveland area fans miss LeBron James. So how about the Cleveland Browns or Cleveland LeBrons act as if he never left?
I got a good kick out of that one when I was reading the outline. I audibly laughed out loud at LeBron's. So well done there, Adam.
It wasn't for me. I just saw it online. I had to share that.
Well, I mean, it's not going to happen, but you could make the argument he's probably like the most prominent, definitely athlete to ever come out of Cleveland. Maybe person. I don't know. There's a lot of presidents from Ohio, so maybe one of them's from Cleveland. But LeBron may be bigger than certain presidents. Your William Howard Tafts of the world. But I kind of like spiders myself, and I don't totally know where that one comes from. Is that like a Cleveland local thing or something, Adam?
I have no idea in the slightest. I don't know where that name came from. I don't even think the Cleveland Spiders became the Cleveland Indians. I think they became a different organization, which is pretty interesting. I actually talked to my dad about it. He said that Spiders have 8 legs. There's 8 position players in the field. Do with that what you will. Maybe that would work, but it sounds a little silly because like you can squash spiders. So I'm not sure. Like it definitely could work. It'd be fun for historical purposes, despite naming after a team that went 20-134 once, perhaps the worst season ever in Major League history. So, yeah,
I didn't think about that part of it. Maybe not the kind of history that you want to be celebrating, but I mean, as far as bugs go, spiders are definitely towards the top of the list as far as intimidation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they definitely are.
Didn't think we'd get into most intimidating bugs in tonight's podcast, but here we are.
That's true. Yeah, I guess maybe the murder hornets can join in on the conversation too.
Hey, I didn't think about that, man. That feels like 2 years ago, but that was 2022. Murder hornets, man.
I think they're still around. Yeah, maybe they'll just change it to that. That'd be something.
Yeah, get with the times. It's definitely top. Well, maybe not as topical now, but definitely. I mean, moving forward, and all jokes aside, I think it was time, and I think the old name was. I mean, I don't think it's like the most racist thing in the world, but I mean, it's definitely a gray area, at least to me. And I don't know. It's not like an overt slur or anything, but it's not historically correct, and it's not what we call Native American people. So I don't know. I thought it's time for a change, and it's interesting. I know that there is opposition to this one. There is a lot of pushback, and I think that comes from a variety of different places. I don't think I'm not going to like open or broadly ratherly condemn everyone who likes the name and saying they're racist or anything, but. I think a lot of it is kind of wanting to appreciate the history of the team. But when history is bad, I think there comes a time where we need to stop celebrating it.
I definitely understand the point of view to change it, and that's keeping with the times and is correcting injustices in the past. But I've also spoken to people who were in favor of the name. They're good, decent people, and they like the Indians. They were annoyed about the Redskins too, and a lot of them were saying that. Essentially, well, if this had to do something with me, I was actually talking to a couple of my friends who are also Jewish, and if a team, for whatever reason, decides to call themselves the Hebrews or the Jews or the Maccabia or Maccabees, we would buy that gear instantly. We wouldn't care how fans would do that. That's just our personal preference. And with the Indians, like there is, of course, historical racism to the name. Apparently, they were named after one of the first Native American baseball players, if not the first. His name is Louis Sakaletsis, and he had a legendary arm. He once threw a ball approximately 414 feet at a Harvard game, and he only played a couple seasons, though, and at the time, the papers were really racist towards him, too, so it's unlikely that they named him for that reason, or if they did, they profited off him, which the Indians actually did with the Chief Wahoo sign that was entirely created on its own, and they actually sold a lot of money despite avid protests. So, and that I think there's a similar case with the Redskins too. However, a Washington Post article 4 years back said that 9 out of 10 Native Americans were completely fine with the name. And if we're going to go with anything, we should ask the people themselves if they're annoyed with it rather than just everyone's opinion. So I understand both sides of it. I don't think there's a clear answer, but I just wanted to put out there the other side's argument that people who do think that way are not necessarily racist or, anti-Times or anything like that. They just have their own reasons.
Yeah, and I don't mean to imply or to say that people are only like the name because they hate Native American people or something. I don't think that's really the case for anybody, but I don't. I think it's definitely a complicated issue, and I do like that you mentioned that we should be considering the people who would actually be hurt by this in the first place, the people who would be the victims of such a name. And it's interesting to hear that 9 out of 10 American people, Native American people, sorry, excuse me, don't have a problem with the team name. I think maybe the argument would be that even 1 out of 10 is enough, and that even if that group of people themselves aren't offended by it, that perhaps people could still be using it in an offensive context. It's very complicated. I feel like I'm kind of dancing all over the place. But Chief Wahoo, that I feel like was definitely racist. That is like a caricature of a Native American person. That I'm glad they got rid of that before this year, and I think that should have been gone a long time ago. But I think that's important too, that you kind of have to consider the whole context, that even if you get rid of Chief Wahoo, that was hand in hand with the team name for years and years. So it's kind of difficult to untangle the two, I suppose.
And another argument that's put out there, for example, and this relates to it, the logo on Aunt Jemima was taken away. That was the maple syrup brand, and some people were saying, well, we didn't ask for this. We asked for more instances where there'd be less circumstances where we'd have to protest and be angry by the system at hand. We didn't ask to just, sure, that's a good thing that you take it off a maple syrup bottle, but what is that really doing to solve the issue at hand? Which is a fair point, because taking Chief Wahoo, sure, that's a good thing. Changing the Cleveland Indians name, that could also be a good thing too. But if people are really trying to correct social injustices, I guess they shouldn't be stopping there.
I think that's another great point too, Adam, that maybe in those ways you're kind of correcting the symptoms or the effects of racism without actually tackling the core of the issue and taking on the kind of change that would prevent those type of things from ever popping up in the first place. So, maybe even if it is doing the right thing in this small instance, you could question, why aren't we doing more? And certainly I do think Major League Baseball and we as a society could do more to combat systematic racism. I am happy to see, I think the league did a better job this year than they have done in recent years, necessarily too. They had to this year, but I think overall the league seems to be moving in the right direction on issues like this.
I would agree with that too. I think they also have listened to the African American community in Major League Baseball and understand that there are a lot less Black players in Major League Baseball these days and perhaps the 70s and 80s, and they're trying to target areas where they can maybe increase that. I actually had a discussion on Nights of Velo with a former Yankee named Darrell Jones. He's African American. He said that if he agreed with me that if there were more baseball or baseball is made cheaper in low income areas, and that could perhaps help, or there are other ways to do that, and agreed that there should be more representation across Major League Baseball.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's especially with kind of the way the game is trending, and you need all the fans you can get, that you have less and less viewers, less and less people of all ages, races, colors coming to baseball games, that you need to explore any and all opportunities to grow the game, and especially in underrepresented areas like the African American community, because we need a Major League Baseball that is reflective of the society that we live in. And we live in a very diverse society with a lot of different people and beliefs. So I think, as much diverse as we can make the game as possible. Yeah, let's do it, man.
MLB definitely has been getting better with that, because there's obviously about a third of Major League players are from Latin America. I know there was the first African-born baseball player named Gift Nagope a few years back, so they even had their outreaches there. There are a lot more transactions between the Asian baseball elites and to the United States. So yeah, they're definitely heading into the right direction. And I know a lot of baseball fans are unhappy with Rob Manfred's regime as a commissioner, but at least he's doing this a little better, or taking some necessary steps forward.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. I like that you mentioned that there have been those pipelines with Latin America and with Japanese baseball players as well. Certainly, I definitely would like to see the game grown more in Europe and Africa as well. But I mean, I think part of that is just by nature of what kids in those areas grow up playing. And I guess the vast majority of the rest of the world is soccer territory. But I mean, I think definitely, like you said, making baseball more affordable for kids to be able to play is a huge step forward in that. Because I mean, you need one ball and you can have 25 kids playing soccer versus everybody's got to have a glove, whatever. You got to have a bat. You got to have baseballs, helmets if you're going to play safely. But and you got to have a field to do it, which is probably, I'd say, a baseball field maybe a little harder to find than a soccer field. I don't want to get too far in the weeds here, but grow the game and try and find a way to make those resources affordable.
And it's not actually only the equipment too. I don't know your sense of playing baseball growing up and how different it is from mine, but all these travel elites, when they travel to different places, they cost a lot of money because to stay at hotels and fare, transportation, and just tournament entry fees. So all of those kind of add up. And also, if anybody wants to be anybody these days, they have to, if they're not good enough to get drafted out of high school, even if they do, they have to go to places like PBR or Perfect Game or Baseball Factory, and they have to pay all this money to get scouted and present reports and get their exit velos taken and get their velos taken and just get an exact measurement on them so they can be more appealing to that draft. All of that costs a lot of money. So it makes sense why a lot of people who play baseball are middle to high income.
Yeah, definitely a lot of barriers to entry there. I'm glad that you mentioned those as well, Adam. I hadn't really been considering kind of the effect that AAU baseball and all that circuit kind of has on the game, and definitely does skew the player pool that we see in the U.S. at least to definitely middle to higher income. But man, I wish I had the answers on how to address that. I just know they need to do something, and that's all right. There's Major League Baseball has people who work full time trying to find those answers. So I'm confident that they will continue to hopefully move in the right direction.
And it seems like they are doing that way. And both the pieces of news, both the Negro Leagues becoming a major league organization, Indians deciding to change their name, those are, for the most part, positive pieces of news. And it does help that the hot stove has been very lukewarm. But there was actually a big acquisition this past week, just to change topics here. And that was James McCann signing a 4-year, $40 million deal with the New York Mets. That was actually a big week for the Mets. They also added GM Jared Porter to a 4-year deal and added bench coach David Joss. And I was actually pretty surprised by that 4-year deal with James McCann because, frankly, pretty much been a backup catcher for a lot of his career. He's not an elite catcher in the game. Maybe doesn't even crack the top 10, but he got that large deal and Mets just needed a catcher. So I feel like it was a bit of an overpay.
I was a little bit surprised by it as well, Adam. I was especially kind of surprised to see him get the 4th year on that contract. We really don't see that very often. We haven't seen it very often, at least recently, for catchers. So certainly a huge vote of confidence in McCann that they've kind of given him the keys to the backstop for the next half decade here. And $40 million, certainly a lot of money as well. I will disagree with you a little bit, though, that I think James McCann has really kind of come on these last few seasons and has elevated his game. I know that he has been regarded as one of the better defensive catchers in the game for a while. He's a great pitch framer, and I know he throws runners out at a very high rate as well. So I guess that's kind of first and foremost. Anytime you're committing to a catcher, he's most of the time going to be or have to be able to hold his own defensively. But the bat has really come alive for McCann in recent years as well. He was an all-star in 2019. I think he was batting like around 300 at the all-star break, but finished that year with a 273 average. Batted 289 in the shortened season last year. Granted, that was even more shortened for him. He only played 31 games. But he's shown that he can hit for a pretty good average, and 18 homers in 2019, that's maybe enough pop for a catcher. If you're a Mets fan, you're maybe a little bit disappointed that he's not JT Realmuto. Is probably how a lot of Mets fans are feeling. But it doesn't like scream overpay to me. It seems a little bit high, especially kind of given the the context of that it doesn't seem like owners are going to spend a whole lot of money this offseason. So maybe a slight overpay, but not like jumping off the page is a bad signing to me or anything.
Well, first off, I'm glad that you mentioned his defensive stats and how he started coming to his own, because that is true about James McCann. He really is the second best catcher on the market. I don't know if he quite cracks the top 10 catchers on the list, but he's certainly close to there. And you're right, if it is an overpay, it's not massive. I think what I was trying to allude to there is that the Angels offered him a 3-year deal, and they were very close towards the very end with signing him, and that's what forced the Mets to sign him to a 4-year deal. Mm-hmm. So I think the average annual value is not bad, but I think the extra year could harm him, because I'm not exactly sure what McCann's age is, but I don't think he's entirely young. So
he's 30.
He's 30. So yeah, 34 for a catcher, that can hurt him a little bit, or that can hurt the Mets a little bit. But hey, they got a catcher, they still save money, and they can still go after big name free agents such as George Springer or Trevor Bauer, or just they can haul in more players, and $10 million is not going to destroy them.
And I think we saw that a little bit too, maybe with the Trevor May signing, where they're making they're impactful signings, but they haven't quite cleared the checkbook yet. I do kind of get the set that they're saving up for a Trevor Bauer, George Springer, a DJ LeMahieu, perhaps. A scary thought, I'm sure, him switching sides in New York. But yeah, I mean, I don't think the Mets are done by any means. And I think I would be a little bit afraid too of signing a 34-year-old, or who will be a 34-year-old catcher, pardon me, at the end of his contract. That's kind of usually about the end of the run for catchers. I know it's tough with that squatting position, man. I never was a catcher myself, but doing that for 20, or I mean, I guess you've been playing since you were a kid, doing that for 30 years, I'm sure that really starts to take a toll on guys' legs. It's amazing that dudes like Yadier Molina are able to stick around for as long as they have. But maybe an interesting factor I think to consider in this signing going forward, and I don't think he would be their DH right away, but if and when the NL adds a DH, that maybe gives you a little more wiggle room for a 4-year deal with a guy like McCann, thinking eventually you could move him to DH if you have to.
It will be interesting to see how the DH progresses, because it looks like, at least heading to 2021, the DH will be removed again from the NL. That's MLB told their respective teams that, hey, we might not be doing this, act as if that we won't have a DH. And that's probably because the whole new CBA agreement and just changes that are happening everywhere because of the pandemic, and a longer season probably expected for next year, and could have just been a one-time thing in the 2020 season, a trial run perhaps. So we could see in the near future, but yeah, that's definitely something to consider, that he could eventually maybe move to DH. And that is normal for catchers, or move to DH, move to first base. Even Posey starting to slowly transition to first base more often. And even Joe Mauer, one of the greatest catchers in the 2000s, had to transition to first base too. So, but McCann's on the upswing. You did mention that. And even though he's just turned 30, that he can still have a couple more years, and Mets would be very happy about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think it definitely helps them in the short term for sure. Adding another bat to that lineup, which is starting to look pretty good. I think the Mets are going to be competitive in 2021, and they're not even done yet. But that's a lot on McCann. Another couple signings we want to talk about. We see Anthony DeSclafani heading out west to be a San Francisco Giant. Hunter Renfroe heading out east to be a Boston Red Sox. Len heading out central to be a Chicago White Sox. I'll just go through the whole list we got here. Raisel Iglesias going to the Angels. David Dahl to the Rangers. Carlos Santana going to the Royals. And Greg Holland also to the Royals. I know that's a lot of names I just threw at you, Adam. Any of those signings really stick out to you?
Well, I think we should talk about the biggest one, or the two biggest ones. And first off, just with Lance Lynn. And that makes the White Sox rotation so much more formidable with Giolito. Keiko had a very, very underrated season, got some Cy Young Award votes, and now Lance Lynn, who also has been a Cy Young caliber pitcher the last 2 years. And now they have a big three in Chicago, and that's certainly going to help them out. And they already have a very talented lineup, and now they have an experienced pitcher, a veteran. So that should really help them out. And there's also a lot of young pitchers on the White Sox staff, so I'm sure they can learn a thing or two from Lance Lynn as well. And just it's a great move from them. I know that Lance Lynn's FIP, which is kind of this stats similar to ERA, but just focuses on what the pitcher control, doesn't peg him too high, and says that he can regress a little bit, and especially in the White Sox ballpark. But nevertheless, it's still a good move for the White Sox. They didn't have to give up too much either.
No, and I think it definitely is a deal that makes sense for a team in their position, on the rise, and definitely a young core to go out and add a veteran to that rotation, like you said, Adam. A guy who I want to say has playoff experience, but now I'm on a blank. Has Lynn in the playoffs before?
Yeah, he was on the Cardinals, so he's been in the playoffs before.
Oh, yeah, he was. He did used to be on the Cardinals, didn't he? I should know this. I despise the Cardinals. I probably formerly despised Lance Lynn.
You tried to block him from your memory.
Yeah, it must have been repressed. But I mean, I think it makes sense if to go out and get a veteran guy who, even regardless of what I know or don't know about his playoff experience, he's a 33-year-old pitcher who has plenty of experience pitching in big games, even the regular season games. So I think that's definitely the kind of guy you want to add to a young rotation, and I think he will definitely help them come playoff time. But the White Sox are getting scary, man, and they may have already been, but I think I don't have much ground to stand on anymore to claim that the Cubs are the best team in Chicago.
It's going to be a tough run of the mill for the Cubbies, and they're certainly at a turning point, not tendering a contract to Albert Amora Jr. and Kyle Schwarber, although you can add that the former kind of had to stay in Chicago, and it's right that the Cubs can move on from him. But Schwarber, he's a potent bat. Cubs are trying to hold on to for a while. Didn't have a great 2020 campaign, but to not tender him a contract, that's an interesting move for them. And Yankees might even pick him up. Some team might, and it'd still be a 30-plus homer threat.
I was going to say, now that you mention it, I feel like he's just going to go to the White Sox and probably hit 50 home runs every year.
Yeah, I guess it could be a possibility. I mean, Schwarber's power, wouldn't be too surprised.
Yeah, he'll find a way to bite us in the butt one way or another. I don't know if we say the A word on the podcast or not. Certainly not while Jules is watching. I will not be speaking such bad words on the show. That was a close one. But other signings that we wanted to break down. Hopefully you didn't mean Anthony DeSclafani and the two biggest ones there, because I think he's kind of a bum personally.
Yeah, he's not the best pitcher. I was talking about Raisel Iglesias because he's this cost-controlled reliever for the Reds, and he's been with them for a while. And that was just a surprising move on the Reds. I mean, here they just made the playoffs. They're looking to trade Sonny Gray. They have little interest in re-signing Bauer. Maybe they don't have the funds for it, but you think that maybe just give like the old college try or something like that. They also got rid of Brian Goodwin and Archie Bradley, who they got as mid-season trade acquisitions, and I just don't know what they're doing. Are they trying to rebuild? Or are they trying to retool? They're a strange team. And meanwhile, the Angels picked up a great reliever. They also signed relievers Kenyon Middleton. Actually, no, I think Middleton went to a different team, but I think they signed Alex Claudio, or they signed another reliever or so, I believe. But they're adding to their bullpen. That's the bottom line. And they're trying to fix a problem which has been bugging them for a while. Pretty much all sorts of pitching, and especially the bullpen too. So getting someone for a relatively low price in Iglesias, that definitely helps.
I agree 100%. I think he'll slot in as the Angels closer right away. I think it's a great signing for them, a team that definitely needed bullpen help, and it sounds like they are going out and getting it this offseason. But I agree with you too, Adam, where I have no idea where the Reds are coming from with this. And just last offseason, I should say, you go out and get Nicholas Castellanos, Mike Moustakas, Sonny Gray, like you mentioned. That was by trade 2 years before, but still, like, they've made all these moves. They trade and get Trevor Bauer. They made all these moves signaling that they're trying to contend and win now. And to trade your closer is very much like rebuilding teams do that, or teams that are about to rebuild, trade your bullpen guys and trade your closers. And maybe it's frustration with Iglesias. I know he has been a little inconsistent for the Reds, hasn't quite lived up to expectations there, but I mean, the upside has been evident. He's definitely shown flashes of brilliance. He had a pretty good year last year after a pretty abysmal 2019. I think he somehow managed to lose like 12, 13 games in 2019. It was ridiculous. But overall, I do think it's a lot of upside in his arm, and it's still a young guy. And I think that the Reds are probably going to regret this, and I think it should pay off for the Angels.
Yeah, the Reds are in a very weird place because they're also in a very weak division too. No offense to your Cubbies there, Henry.
It's true.
But yeah, the Cardinals are weird contenders, as are the Brewers, the Cubs too, and the Reds were really among that mix where they're all fringe contenders, probably get knocked out early in the playoffs, as we unfortunately saw this year. To throw it back,
it was a bloodbath, man.
Yeah, I still can't get over that. I'm sure you can't either. The Marlins knocking out the Cubs, and oof, that's a rough one. But I digress. It's not the best division, and it's to see the Reds just trade away all their players, non-tender them. It's very surprising considering the direction there we're heading in.
And it's not like they have this overflow of bullpen talent either, that it's waiting to take the reins. I mean, you have Michael Lorenzen, who's been plenty inconsistent himself. He's definitely shown upside too, but there's not really a whole lot of guys. There's not a go-to de facto closer now in that Reds bullpen. So I think they may regret that in the short term, and they're going to have to score even more runs than they previously had to, especially playing in the Great American Launchpad.
And it is interesting because despite it being the Great American Launchpad, their hitters were some of the league's worst last year. They had some of the worst offensive team, and their bread and butter was their starting pitching, and after that it was their bullpen, and both are being cut, and they're trying to cut even more. So it's a strange situation. It's sad to see because this is a team that looked like they were up and coming, and now they're not.
Yeah, and maybe it's just budget reasons too. I know the Cincinnati, not a big market team, and they've historically not been very big spenders. So, and maybe just trying to clear a little bit of payroll, or maybe they have something up their sleeve, thinking they can save room and sign Bauer. But I would be very, very surprised to see him returning to Cincinnati. And I mean, I don't really think they have too much money left in the budget to go out and make a splash elsewhere. So I don't know what they would be clearing for, but I guess we'll see how it works out for him.
And on a different note, it does seem like the free agent market is starting to heat up. Maybe teams are trying to get a nice Christmas present for themselves or a holiday present, but they are starting to heat up. And one thing that is interesting, one part that's a little bit cold, is that the Yankees and LeMahieu are $25 million apart. LeMahieu was seeking a 4-year, $72 million deal. Yankees offered him a 4-year, $72 million deal, and the Yankees, or LeMahieu, countered with a 5-year, $100 million deal. And that's not great, especially since the Yankees really want to hone in on LeMahieu. I actually just wrote an article about Brian Cashman conference video that I looked at, and essentially the Yankees have LeMahieu pegged as number one target. It's not an end-all, but it's not the most ideal place they're looking at, especially if the Dodgers or the Blue Jays or maybe even the Nationals or the Giants. A lot of teams are looking at LeMahieu. He obviously is one of their better hitters on the face of the earth right now, and for good reason.
And I like what you talked about too, Adam, with the Yankees, that makes me think that he kind of has some leverage in those negotiations. You think about how fundamental he is to that lineup. He's been Yankees' best hitter for the last 2-3 years, probably. I don't know when the last time Judge had a truly great season. Not to rip on him too much, but I mean, you see Judge and Stanton, they do get hurt, and DJ LeMahieu has been a fixture in that lineup and has produced at a high level. So, I mean, you could certainly make the case that he's worth 5 years and $100 million. And come on, man, it's the Yankees. You guys can give him an extra $25 million.
I think the thing that's troubling the Yankees is that they don't want to go over this luxury tax threshold, which a lot of teams are really trying to avoid. And I feel like on Spot Track, they're only $1 million under budget. So that's not going to last for them. But there's different thresholds. If you go over a certain amount, you get taxed more, and they don't want to do that. So, and it's also understandable because LeMahieu, while great with his bat, he actually has been declined defensively a little bit despite his great versatility at the Yankees, and the speed isn't where it once was. So that depends where, if his power gets sapped, he's already 32 years old, a 5-year deal, that can start to go away. He has the all-field power where he can still hit around 300, but what if this power surge just goes away in a couple of years? And that's what concerns Yankee fans and concerns a lot of teams, because he's offering a fifth-year deal, and teams may not be willing to go that far, especially in a pandemic-shortened season where a lot of teams are clawing and scratching to hold on to their budget.
You make another good couple points there too, Adam, that the power especially had been kind of a late bloom, I guess, for LeMahieu. That wasn't really something that he did early in his career. He's always been a great average hitter. Did used to play in Colorado, so I'm sure that helped a little bit too. But yeah, that maybe he really has kind of broken out these last couple seasons to where maybe you wonder. I mean, it seems mostly legit at this point, but I mean, if it can come that quickly, maybe it can go that quickly. And I think defense another important factor to consider there too, especially if it comes down to you can't have both him and Gary Sanchez long term yet, or Stanton for that matter too. You only have one DH, and maybe you can't have too many of those guys where you wonder that if the glove would be a problem.
I wouldn't say that LeMahieu would really be the type of player to transition to DH, but he'll always be around average fielding. It seems like he was a 3-time Gold Glove Award winner, but yeah, it's definitely declining, and the Yankees defense isn't great as it is. And another team just as easily, the Blue Jays or the Dodgers, they're looking to spend. They have a lot more room, a lot more flexibility. They can outbid the Yankees, and LeMahieu and the Yankees have a great rapport, and even Brian Cashman said that if he were to go a different route, he would contact LeMahieu's agents first, which is, you don't really hear that all too often if he was going to go a different direction. That's how tight-knit the Yankees and LeMahieu are. They both want a deal to happen, but nevertheless, another team could come in and just swoop him up, and that'd be really bad for the Yankees because he really sets the tone at the top of the order.
It would be very interesting to see what a post-LeMahieu Yankees lineup would look like. I mean, I think it'd still be a strong lineup, but yeah, they would. I mean, especially if the injury bug that's been biting them the last couple of years, if that keeps popping up, then I think they would definitely be missing him. But yeah, man, now that you mentioned the Dodgers and Blue Jays, I'm like struggling to picture LeMahieu out of pinstripes too. I think that's really just like the perfect lineup for him and the perfect ballpark for his swing, where it kind of benefit from the short porch a little bit. And that power plays up there perhaps a little more than it would in other ballparks, certainly in Dodger Stadium. But so I don't know. And yeah, it sounds like they have a great relationship too. So would you say it's more likely than not that LeMahieu returns?
I think it is likely because he's still the Yankees' number one priority. And I think the Yankees will go all out on one free agent this season. They might have to overpay for LeMahieu for this, but I think he's their guy. And I think they're trying to, after that, then they'll test the waters out with the other teams. They'll try to fix up the bullpen cheaply and fix up the starter rotation cheaply, take some flyers on low risk, high reward type of players. We go after someone like Kluber or Brad Hand, whose peripherals say that he's starting to decline, even though he had a great 2020 campaign. So it's kind of like things like that, how they'll focus on LeMahieu, but it can't be an end all for them, and it might harm them in the long run.
That's another good point too. And if you are going to take some of those low cost flyers, I think Brad Hand and Corey Kluber would make a lot of sense for a lot of teams, certainly the Yankees as well. And pitching, starting pitching help that the Yankees need. I think Corey Kluber would be a great candidate there. Except then you worry about injuries again. Another guy who seems to get hurt quite a bit. Maybe you need a little bit more durability there, but I agree, Adam. I think you would want to definitely, if you are going big in on that one free agent, that you got to hit on a couple of those low cost flyers as well.
And another free agent that's will cost quite a pretty penny for some teams, and that's JT Realmuto. Now, I should mention this beforehand before I preface what he's asking for. Joe Mauer and his extension for the Twins, he got an 8-year, $184 million deal. So that's the threshold, but nevertheless, a catcher has never had a $100 million contract in free agency before. And Realmuto, in a pandemic-shortened season, when he's 29 years old, asking for a big deal, is asking for $200 million. So that does not seem the most ideal idea. Even if you go 8 years, $200 million, perfectly reasonable for him to make $25 million. Do you really want Realmuto when he's 37? Sure, he's still great. Sure, he's, the best catcher in the game. And there would be banking on his earlier seasons, but no, I don't think any team would want to cash out that much. And I think his market's a little bit thinner than people expect too.
Well, and the numbers you brought up at the beginning there too, that no catcher's ever signed a $100 million free agency deal, kind of just speaks to the riskiness of catchers and the riskiness of that asset. And you got to count on those knees holding up for 8 years. And like you said too, he's already 29 now. He'd be 37 at the end of that deal. That seems a bit ludicrous, Mr. Real Muto. I would temper that just a little bit. And he is the best catcher in the game. He deserves a lot of money, and certainly $100 million contract. I would expect him to become the first there, but I don't know about 200 million. And if there was one team that I thought was going to back up the Brinks truck and pay him, it was the Mets, and they just locked up James McCann for the next 4 years. So I would think maybe back to the Phillies for Real Muto, but then there's all this news coming out the last couple of weeks where apparently the owner said like they don't have any money, and he's saying no, I didn't say that. I don't really know who to believe, but either way, I don't think the Phillies are going to be able to sign him for $200 million.
Weren't the Phillies the same team that said that we're going to spend stupid money on free agents a couple of years ago? I mean, we did see that of Harper. Obviously, he's not worth $330 million. He's still overall a very good player, but he's not worth that much or for that long. And he maybe blew his chance of re-signing Real Muto. But besides the Phillies, the Nationals are interested and the Blue Jays are. But because of that thin market, would a team really go that far to sign him? And again, he mentioned 100 million being the threshold to break, and he will certainly break that. But how far do you go above that? Maybe a 5-year, $120 million deal seems more appropriate.
Yeah, I think you probably hit the nail right on the head. That prediction seems about right for me. And man, the Blue Jays are just in on everybody too. But yeah, if you only have a couple fish in the water and looking to sign him, then yeah, what's the point? And needlessly going up to around 200 million and just bidding against yourself. So I would expect something more modest, kind of in that range you described there, Adam.
I agree, and yeah, something modest, something probably I would have to imagine under 30 million. He doesn't deserve that much, and that's a lot to give to a catcher. So we'll have to wait and see on that end. There's a couple other markets that are developing that we should mention before we wrap up. And for example, Didi Gregorius is getting some looks from the Reds and Yankees. He actually does want a reunion with the Yankees and is kind of waiting on how LeMahieu turns out. These Yankees lose on LeMahieu. Gregorius could be the way to go. Then you also have Liam Hendricks, who's being pursued by a plethora of contenders such as the Dodgers, White Sox, A's, Mets, Astros. Semion's market is developing. Dodgers are interested in him. Bauer has been linked to the Giants a little bit because they don't really have too much pitching. And Justin Turner is looking more and more like a lock with the Los Angeles Dodgers. So it does seem like these markets are starting to take shape and evolve. And Henry, do you have any predictions for some of these free agents?
Man,
sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're good. I'll run through and make some predictions, but I am encouraged to see the market. It does look to be heating up a little bit. We had some of the signings that we mentioned earlier in the show. So I would say hopefully these guys are finding homes before too long. But just running through that list, let's make some quick predictions. Liam Hendricks, I do think probably would end up being a Los Angeles Dodger, unfortunately, just with the bullpen trouble they've had and him being the best reliever on the market and them having all that money. I do think he'll end up being there. As much as I think it would be awesome to see Didi Gregorius return to the Yankees, I would say probably returning to the Phillies, re-signing there would be the most likely outcome. Although Reds would be interesting too, but like we were saying earlier in the show, we don't really know what the Reds are doing. Maybe they're saving money for Didi Gregorius. That could be their master plan. And you could do worse as far as master plans go. I think it'd certainly be an upgrade over Freddie Galvis. Marcus Semien, for some reason, I just feel like he's going to return to the A's. I feel like that's just like they've unlocked his value. That's where he's supposed to be and just a good fit in that lineup. Kurt Suzuki, I guess Angels sounds right for him. I really haven't thought much about Kurt Suzuki, to be honest. Trevor Bauer, that is the tricky one to predict. I don't think he ends up being a Yankee just because, it'd be so much money to commit between him and Garrett Cole. And, even if one of them turns out to be good and then the other one gets hurt and bust out, that still could be crippling to the franchise, just have so much money tied up in those two players. I still get a feeling that Trevor Bauer is going to be an Angel, would be my prediction, just because how badly they need pitching, how much money they have to spend, and then actually having a pretty decent base on offense to build around to where you get the sense maybe Trevor Bauer could be the domino that flips the switch for them. And then I would agree with you too, Justin Turner back to the Dodgers.
I respect all those picks. Those are very well constructed and thought out. And for the most part, I agree with it. I would say a couple ones I disagree with you on is Didi Gregorius, because the Reds actually have been linked to him heavily, which is interesting because they have this guy named, I believe, Jose Garcia, who's coming up, who's not that great, and they want to stopgap at least for a year or two. And Gregorius shouldn't cost too much, and Freddie Galvis left, so Reds will need a new shortstop. And Trevor Bauer, I agree. Yeah, he should go to the Angels. I think that with the Angels having Albert Pujols and Justin Upton coming off the bus rather shortly, that should probably be a good fit for them. They desperately need starting pitching. And I guess besides that, yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with you. I think Hendricks will go to the Dodgers. Kurt Suzuki will go to Angels because he's been linked. And yeah, Justin Turner also seems like he'll go back to the Dodgers, and Semien will remain with the A's. Those seem like they could use like a 1-year deal or just try to get their value back up and continue to prove themselves. Turner had a great season, but it was a bit injury riddled, and he's been a bit injury riddled the past few years. So he might want to try to do a one-off deal, or maybe he knows the Dodgers will try to keep him up for the rest of his career. So it seems like a good fit.
A guy where you struggle to picture him in another jersey other than the one he wears now. That would just be kind of weird to see Justin Turner out of that Dodger blue. And yeah, man, the Dodgers are going to reload, I'm sure, and going to be good for years to come. I would expect to see him come back as well. But I'm just excited to see these guys start finding some new homes. And it's going to mean we're that much closer to the start of the season, which – side note, actually, I heard they're talking about potentially delaying it until vaccine is more widespread. That would be kind of a bummer to me. I'm hoping for 162 games, and maybe you could still pull it off and just push the season back a little bit. But certainly, I'd say that the health of the nation takes precedent to me watching as many baseball games as possible. So. But just something to think about. That there is some chatter about that. We'll certainly report on it as more news comes available.
I'm actually glad that you mentioned the last part, and there's been no official word yet from Major League Baseball themselves on making that drastic change just yet. And even Brian Cashman in that phone call said that he has not heard any word from any higher ups yet. So at least that's a good sign. We obviously want everyone to be safe, but we also want a full 162 game season. But at the very least, we're having the free agent market get back up there, and hopefully even by next week, right before Christmas, we'll see more free agents sign and have more good hot stove topics to talk about. So on that note, thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you have a great week, and hope happy holidays. And until next time, this is the Exit Velo podcast.